In the scorched plains of Dry Creek, even the wind seemed to whisper insults. It carried dust, heat, and the low hum of disdain. People walked quickly there, heads down, eyes wary, especially when she appeared. No one knew her real name anymore. They just called her too filthy to touch. Sadie Mae Whitlow had once been a daughter. Once she had golden curls and a mother who brushed them gently each morning. But that was before the fever came, before the town buried her family without prayers and left her to wander. Now at 17, Sadie was a ghost to most and a disgrace to the rest. She wandered near the saloon most days, not for company but for crumbs, scraps left in the dirt. The dogs growled if she got too close, the men jeered, and the women turned their children's faces away. Her skin was dark with grime, her nails chipped and raw, but it was her eyes, those silent, stormy eyes, that unsettled people most. They had not dimmed. They stared straight through cruelty, never begging. One morning, as the sun burned down like judgment, she bent near the well behind the blacksmith's. A crust of bread sat abandoned near the bucket. She reached for it. A child, no older than 6, saw her and screamed, "Don't touch it. You'll make it filthy." Within moments, 3 boys came running. One kicked the bread into the dust, another threw a rock. Sadie didn't flinch. She simply turned and walked away, the long hem of her ragged dress dragging behind her like a shadow that wouldn't let go. At the general store, Mrs. Tilley locked the door the moment she saw Sadie approaching. A sign hung crooked in the window. "Godliness is cleanliness." Sadie sat beside the hitching post outside the church. She didn't go inside anymore. The last time she did, the preacher stopped his sermon mid-word, his voice turning to ash. She remembered the way his eyes had burned into her as he said, "You bring in sickness and sin, girl. Best you leave." No one questioned it. Not then, not now. Sadie was cursed. Maybe it was her silence. Maybe it was the way she kept surviving, no matter how much they wished she wouldn't. As the sky deepened toward dusk, and the last rays of light bled over the horizon, Sadie rose to her feet and walked back to the edge of town, to the place where the earth forgot how to grow. Her shelter was a hollow beneath a collapsed wagon, half covered with dry brush and rusted tools. There she curled into herself, pressing her back against the wheel, her face to her knees. The wind howled louder that night, or maybe it was her own breath echoing off the empty plains. But somewhere out there, beyond Dry Creek, beyond the spit and the slurs, a pair of eyes had noticed her, watching, wondering. She didn't see it at first. The glove lay half-buried in the dust beside the old cattle trail, its dark leather stained with sweat and sun. Sadie stepped over it, paused, then turned back. There was something strange about it, not just its presence, but the quality. This glove didn't belong to Dry Creek. Too clean, too fine, too whole. She bent down and brushed it off, holding it like something fragile. The stitching was tight, elegant. There was a faint monogram near the wrist. TC. Whoever it belonged to, they were someone important. But around here, importance didn't mean kindness. She slid it into the hidden fold of her dress, the one she'd sewn herself with a rusted needle and a strip of canvas. Then she moved on. Later that day, just before the sun crested its peak, a horse thundered into town. Dust spiraled behind it, kicking up old sins and new whispers. The rider sat tall in the saddle, face shaded by a broad-brimmed hat, his coat patched but dignified. It was the kind of arrival that made shopkeepers lean out their doors and saloon girls smooth their skirts. Not because they wanted to sell something, but because they recognized who it was. Thomas Callahan had returned. He was a Callahan in name and legacy, the son of Angus Callahan, owner of the Triple C Ranch, a man who once broke wild mustangs with a whisper. Thomas didn't inherit his father's voice, but he carried his weight. Wounded in a barbed wire accident out in Wyoming, he now bore a limp that no one dared mock. He wasn't just respected, he was revered, and he noticed her. From the corner of his eye, as he tied his horse near the well, he saw the girl by the alley, barefoot, hair matted, face hidden beneath shadows. Just a flicker, just a glance, but it stuck. "Who is that?" he asked the stable boy. The boy shrugged, wiping his nose with a dirty sleeve. "No one, sir, just the filthy girl." Thomas said nothing. He looked back once more. She was already gone. That night he sat in the saloon, boots propped, nursing a glass of rye. Men spoke in loud voices. Women laughed louder. But beneath it all, there was a current, an undercurrent of cruelty that kept circling back to the same name. Sadie May, though they never said it. They called her plague, curse, filth. She even touched Old Man Carver's fence once, someone sneered. He burned it down just to be sure. Thomas didn't laugh. He drank quietly, listening, measuring. In the shadows behind the saloon, Sadie sat curled behind a stack of crates, her back pressed to the wall. She didn't know who he was, didn't care. But she felt something shift that day. The glove was still in her pocket. She hadn't let go. The scream rose before the smoke. A barn on the town's edge lit up like kindling soaked in oil. Flames licked at the sky, snapping and crackling, hungry for wood and straw. People rushed from homes and saloons, some carrying buckets, others just watching. It happened fast, too fast for sense. Someone yelled, "She did it! I saw her run!" That was all it took. Sadie was halfway down the slope behind the general store, barefoot and breathless, when a group of men cornered her. She didn't resist. She never did. One of them, Jed Granger, a man who smelled like tobacco and rot, grabbed her by the arm and dragged her through the street. "The cursed girl torched Carver's barn," someone shouted. "No surprise there," another chimed in. "She's been nothing but trouble." Sadie didn't speak. Her lips were cracked, bleeding from sun and silence. She stared at the ground as they pulled her toward the square, where the sheriff stood pale and uncertain. The crowd swelled. Angry voices, twisted mouths, raised fists. "She's a danger to us all. She should have been driven out years ago. She cursed my wife's milk cow." Then came the whip. Sheriff Colton raised it high, his hand trembling. His eyes met Sadie's for a moment, just a flicker, and something like shame passed through them. But the pressure behind him was too much. Justice had become spectacle. And then came the voice. "Enough!" It wasn't shouted, it wasn't angry. It was clear, commanding, final. The crowd turned. Thomas Callahan stood at the edge of the circle, coat unbuttoned, hat in hand. His limp slowed him, but each step he took felt heavier than boots should allow. He didn't look at the sheriff. He looked at Sadie. "I said enough." Sheriff Colton lowered the whip. "Thomas, this ain't your—" "It is now," Thomas cut in. "You'll have to go through me first." Gasps swept the crowd. Jed loosened his grip on Sadie's arm, confused. The boy beside him took a step back. The sheriff swallowed hard but said nothing. Thomas stepped forward, reached down, and gently lifted Sadie from the dirt. His hand, clean and calloused, wrapped around hers. It was the first time anyone had touched her without fear or hatred. Her knees buckled, but he steadied her. A silence fell, sharp and sudden. "I don't see a criminal," Thomas said. "I see a scapegoat." He turned without another word, guiding Sadie away from the square. The crowd parted like water around a stone. No one dared stop him. Behind them, whispers ignited like dry brush. Madness, foolishness, sympathy for the devil. But Thomas didn't listen, and Sadie, torn, trembling, eyes wide with disbelief, let herself be led. For the first time in years, someone had stepped into her storm and offered shelter. Sadie didn't remember the ride, only the warmth of the horse beneath her, the sway of Thomas's arms holding her steady, and the way the wind no longer felt like a weapon. By the time they reached the Callahan Ranch, the stars were out, scattered like promises across a quiet sky. Thomas helped her down, careful not to startle her. She didn't speak. Her legs trembled beneath the thin dress, her feet blistered and raw. But when he opened the door and stepped aside, she followed. Inside, it was clean, but not showy. A fire burned low. The scent of cedar hung in the air. He led her to a chair near the hearth and brought a basin of water without asking. She flinched when he dipped a cloth into it. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. Sadie nodded once, but her eyes stayed locked on the flames. He knelt and began wiping the blood from her knees. Her skin twitched at every touch, not from pain, but from unfamiliar kindness. "You've got more grit than most men I know," he said, not expecting a reply. She glanced at him, confused. Compliments weren't things she understood. After cleaning her wounds, he handed her a blanket and stepped away. She wrapped it around herself tightly, like armor. "Hungry?" She didn't answer. He brought bread and a tin of beans, placing them on the table. She stared at the food, then at him. "It's yours," he assured. "No tricks." Sadie moved slowly, like a stray unsure of the open door. When she took the first bite, her hands shook so badly the spoon clattered against the bowl. He looked away, pretending not to notice. Later, he set a cot near the fire. She lay on top of it, fully clothed. her fingers clutched around the blanket's edge. Her body stayed stiff as if sleep might be another trap. Thomas sat nearby, polishing an old rifle. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Sadie." He looked up. "Sadie what?" She swallowed. "Sadie May Whitlow." He nodded, as if he'd known it all along. "Well, Sadie May," he said, "you're safe here, for as long as you want." Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. She had run out of tears years ago. The fire cracked. A silence settled between them, heavy but gentle. In the distance, coyotes cried to the moon, but their song couldn't reach her now. She closed her eyes for the first time in what felt like forever, and when sleep came, it wasn't fear that carried her into it. It was the memory of her name spoken softly, like it mattered. The sun rose quiet over the Callahan ranch, casting long shadows over fence posts and dew-kissed grass. Inside the house, Sadie stood at the window, her blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes scanned the fields like a cage thing, expecting the door to slam shut again. But no one came. By midday, word had spread. The mayor himself rode up to the porch in a puff of pride and dust. Thomas met him at the door, arms crossed, eyes hard. "You've made your point," the mayor said. "But the town won't tolerate this." Thomas didn't blink. "Tolerate what?" "Harboring her. You're putting your whole family name in the mud. They'll stop doing business with you. You'll lose hands. And you know as well as I do, she's not right." "She's a girl," Thomas replied, "that's all. A girl who's been nothing but disease and trouble." Thomas stepped closer, voice low. "Or maybe a girl we've all failed." The mayor spat on the ground and rode off, muttering curses, but the warning had been delivered. Inside, Sadie had heard every word. She didn't cry. She simply turned from the window, lips pressed tight, and began to fold the blanket. "You don't have to leave," Thomas said. "I should," she whispered. "You're not going anywhere." Her hands trembled. "They'll ruin you. I've survived worse than gossip." Later that day, Sadie sat beside the stable, brushing out the mane of an old mare named Juniper. The horse blinked slowly, patient and still. Sadie's fingers moved cautiously at first, then with more confidence. Her touch had always been gentle. It was people who had never let her use it. Thomas watched from a distance, arms crossed. He saw how she softened near animals, how she hummed under her breath when she thought no one heard. In the evenings, she read from a tattered book Thomas found in the attic. Her lips mouthed the words, remembering letters she hadn't seen in years. She bathed, braided her hair, and for the first time looked in a mirror without disgust. Thomas didn't crowd her. He spoke little, asked less. But he was present, in the way he left food near her chair, in the way he checked the windows twice each night, in the way he said her name with no trace of shame. One evening, they sat on the porch as the sky turned gold. She spoke first. "Why are you doing this?" Thomas glanced at her, then back at the fields. "Because you matter," he said. Sadie turned her face away, but he saw it, the tiniest flicker of a smile. A seed planted in scorched earth. She didn't know what would come next, but for now she was no longer invisible, and the wind that once carried whispers of hate now carried something softer, something new. It started with a hiss in the night, then the sharp crack of wood breaking. Thomas woke to smoke drifting through the open window and the unmistakable scent of burning pine. He grabbed his rifle and limped outside. The barn was on fire. Sadie ran behind him, barefoot in her nightdress, eyes wide with terror. Flames climbed the walls, casting monstrous shadows across the yard. Thomas shouted for water, but it was already too late. The fire had been set well, too well to be an accident. By morning, only blackened beams remained. Someone had nailed a board to the fence, letters painted in red. "Filthy lover." Sadie stared at the words, face pale and still. Thomas walked over and ripped the board down without a word. His jaw was tight, his hands shaking not from fear, but from fury. Later she packed her things. All she had fit in a small bundle, some clothes, the old book, the glove. "I can't stay," she said. Thomas blocked the door. "They don't get to win. They already have. Look what they've done. Let them burn down every barn from here to Laramie. You're not leaving." Her voice cracked. "I can't be the reason you lose everything. You're not the reason." "They are." Sadie's shoulders sagged. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "I'm tired, Thomas. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of people looking at me like I'm dirt." He stepped closer. "Then stop hiding." She looked up, eyes brimming with something too raw to name. That night, she tried to slip away. left a note on the table. "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry." She thought she could disappear again like before, but she didn't make it far. Thomas found her in the woods, curled beneath a tree, her bundle at her feet. "Thought I told you," he said, breathless. "You're not going anywhere." She turned her face away, ashamed. "I'm not clean," she whispered. "Not in their eyes. Maybe not in yours either." Thomas knelt beside her. He took her hand, slow and steady. "You're the purest thing I've ever known." The moonlight caught her tears this time. They didn't fall quietly. She leaned into him for the first time without flinching, and though he wanted to kiss her, he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her and held her like she was something precious, something he wasn't ready to lose. When they walked back to the ranch, it wasn't as two broken people, but as one defiant truth. The fire hadn't destroyed her. It had revealed who would stand beside her when the whole world turned away. The town council met behind closed doors. Rumors poured through the cracks like smoke, loud, bitter, choking. By morning, the verdict came clear and cold. Sadie Mae Whitlow must leave Dry Creek, permanently. They delivered the message through the sheriff, a folded letter and a forced apology. Thomas read it once, then twice. His hands stayed steady, but his eyes didn't. "If she stays," the sheriff said, voice low, "you lose everything. Contracts, cattle trades. Your men won't work. Even the supply lines'll freeze. They'll strangle you quiet." Thomas didn't answer right away. He stared out the window where Sadie brushed the mare with a calm steadiness that belied the storm closing in. "I'm not sending her away," he said. "You sure about that?" "Yes." He wrote a letter that night by candlelight, his pen scratching slow, deliberate lines. It was addressed to the governor. Inside were names, dates, deals made in the shadows, bribes passed in church pews. He had stayed silent long enough. If they wanted a reckoning, he'd give them one. Meanwhile, Sadie prepared herself, not to flee, but to face them. She wore the dress Thomas's late mother had once sewn, clean, simple, with lace at the collar. She braided her hair with trembling fingers and scrubbed her hands raw until they no longer looked like they'd crawled through ash. When she stepped into town, heads turned. The street went quiet. She didn't lower her gaze, not this time. Whispers cut through the air like knives. "Look who thinks she's one of us. She's mocking the church now." Thomas must be blind, but she kept walking, one step then another until her boots touched the church porch. Inside, pews were full. The preacher had just opened his Bible when the doors creaked wide. Sadie paused. Her heart pounded. Every muscle told her to run. Then Thomas stood. He moved down the aisle with his steady limp and reached her side. Without a word, he took her hand, turned toward the congregation and knelt. He kissed her hand gently, reverently, like she was something sacred. The room froze. A woman gasped. A man dropped his hat. The preacher's mouth opened, but no words came out. Thomas rose, still holding her hand. "She's not leaving," he said. "Not now. Not ever." The silence held. And in that silence, something broke. Some ancient wall of shame and superstition. Not completely, not for everyone, but enough. Outside, the wind shifted. It carried no insults this time, just awe. Sadie didn't speak. She didn't need to. The gesture had said it all. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she knew what today had offered. A place to stand. A hand that wouldn't let go. And a truth too bold to burn. Gasps echoed through the church, like wind through broken glass. People shifted in the pews, unsure whether to stand, flee, or simply stare. Thomas still held Sadie's hand, his grip firm, steady, undeniable. Outside, the news spread faster than fire. He kissed her hand, in front of everyone. Some said it was a stunt. Others called it blasphemy. But there were those, quiet, thoughtful souls, who saw something else, something braver. An old woman in the back rose slowly. Her name was Edith Barker, widowed 30 years, known more for silence than sympathy. She stepped forward, cane clicking against the wooden floor, and stood before Sadie. No words. She opened her arms and wrapped them around the girl everyone had called cursed. "I should have done this years ago," she whispered. Sadie stiffened, unsure how to receive kindness that didn't demand something in return. But then her arms moved, slowly, uncertainly, and held on. Someone clapped, just once, then again. A hesitant rhythm of reckoning. A boy with a runny nose stepped forward and offered Sadie a crumpled wildflower. She took it with both hands, like it was gold. A shopkeeper, Mr. Talbot, nodded at Thomas as he passed. Didn't think I'd live to see this day, he muttered. Outside, a small group had gathered. Most stood back, watching from porches, arms crossed, but a few stepped forward, not with apologies, not yet, but with eyes softer than before. The dam hadn't broken, but it had cracked. That afternoon, Thomas returned home with Sadie. The house felt different, less like a shelter, more like a beginning. He opened a small box from the mantel, something he hadn't touched in years. Inside lay a brooch, silver and turquoise, shaped like a dove. It had belonged to his mother. He fastened it gently to Sadie's dress, just above her heart. "She would have liked you," he said. Sadie touched the brooch with trembling fingers. "It's too much." "No," he replied. "It's exactly right." The gesture meant more than adornment. It was a declaration she belonged here, not hidden, not pitied, but honored. In the days that followed, people still whispered, but not all the words were cruel. Children waved when they passed the ranch. A preacher stopped by to check on repairs and stayed for coffee. A girl from town asked Sadie if she might help with reading. Thomas stayed close but never hovered. He let Sadie find her place at her own pace. She wasn't fixed, she wasn't saved. She was seen, and for the first time in Dry Creek's bitter memory, that was enough to start something new. The wind shifted again, this time colder, sharper. Not from the sky, but from men whose pride had been bruised. The mayor, red-faced and furious, stormed through town like a kicked hornet. He wasn't alone. By evening, he'd gathered a group, ranchers, merchants, and bitter men who feared change more than fire. They met at the saloon behind closed doors, muttering of decency and tradition, sharpening words like weapons. "They think they can shame us in our own church? They mock every rule we've ever held. They'll poison the whole town if we let them." A plan took shape, a public removal, quiet if possible, forceful if needed, but they hadn't counted on the governor's reply. 3 days after Thomas sent the letter, a detachment of state marshals rode into Dry Creek. Dust followed their boots, and steel glinted at their hips. The sheriff met them at the edge of town, pale and sweating. "What's this about?" The lead marshal handed him a sealed order. "Investigation into corruption, abuse of office, and willful endangerment of a citizen under false accusations." The town council's power collapsed like rotten timber. Arrests followed, bribes uncovered, ledgers taken from safes, names exposed, men who had profited from cruelty while preaching purity. The mayor tried to flee. He didn't make it far. Sadie watched it unfold from the porch, silent as ever. But her silence wasn't fear now. It was power. It was patience finally rewarded. When the marshals asked her to speak, she hesitated. "I'm not good with words," she said softly. Thomas took her hand. "Say only what's true." She stepped onto the church steps that Sunday, facing the town that once called her cursed. "I didn't set fire to a barn," she began. "I didn't bring disease. I didn't curse your land." She swallowed hard, then lifted her chin. "You just didn't want to look at me. I wasn't filthy. I was forgotten." The crowd stood still. Some looked away. Others cried. "I survived because no one helped. I stayed human when no one treated me like one. That's all I ever wanted." A murmur passed through the people. Not shame, not quite. Something more complicated. Sadie stepped down without waiting for applause. Later that day, children played near the ranch. Neighbors left baskets of bread, jars of preserves, and hand-sewn linens at the gate. No notes, no signatures, just offerings of repair. Thomas rebuilt the barn with help from a few brave souls, men who once spat in Sadie's direction, now hammering in silence. She didn't forget the years of scorn, but she let them pass like dust in the wind. Dry Creek hadn't changed overnight, but it had changed. And in that fragile, unfolding moment, Sadie realized something deeper than justice had taken root. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was becoming. Spring came late to Dry Creek, but when it did, it came all at once. Wildflowers sprouting between fence rails, the river loosening from winter's grip, and a softness in the air that made even old grudges fade. The Callahan Ranch was no longer just a refuge. It was a home. Repairs were finished, the horses grew fatter, chickens roamed freely in the yard, and laughter, rare and surprising, echoed sometimes from the porch. Sadie worked with orphans now. The church opened a small classroom for children with no family, and she volunteered without being asked. The first time she entered, the children stared. By the end of the week, they fought over who sat closest to her. She read aloud each morning, her voice steady and full of wonder. The same voice once drowned in silence now shaped stories for others. At the edge of town, a small grave lay marked with a wooden cross. It was her mother's. Sadie visited on a clear afternoon alone. She knelt, brushing away the dirt and weeds. "I never forgot you," she whispered, "but I forgot myself for a while. I think you'd be proud of who I found again." She placed a single wildflower beside the marker, yellow, bright, alive. As she rose, sunlight caught a gold band on her finger. Simple, smooth, unmistakable. No ceremony, no parade. Just a quiet promise shared under the same tree where Thomas had once found her trying to disappear. Back at the ranch, she helped a small boy saddle a pony. He was new, left at the church steps last week, unsure and angry. Sadie knew that look. She gave him space, then gave him time. And now, she gave him reins. "You ready?" she asked. The boy nodded, eyes wide with excitement. "Hold tight." He grinned, then rode off clumsily, boots kicking the air. Sadie watched him go, arms crossed, smile slow and real. Thomas came up behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're good with them," he said. "I remember what it felt like to be forgotten." He nodded. "You remind us not to forget anymore." They stood together, watching the boy ride. Dry Creek still had its ghosts, but it had gardens now too, and music on Sundays. And moments where people stopped and truly saw one another. Sadie had been named by the town's cruelty. She had been rewritten by its silence. But in the end, she named herself. And now, her name echoed in the stories children told, in the horses she tamed, and in the hearts she helped mend. She was never filthy, she was unforgettable. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. And click the next video on your screen to discover another tale of quiet defiance, deep redemption, and unexpected love that changes everything.